Hello, welcome to the Hope, Health, and Healing Podcast. I am Michelle Hannah Fields, and I am your host for episode 44, where I am joined by my friend, Grace Jernigan Cadenhead. This will actually be part one of a 3-part series. I know that you will be encouraged and inspired through Grace's story of faith. She shares that she began her journey of faith at a young age after even suffering some tragic loss of her mother. She shares that how she has seen God throughout her life, and no matter what she faced, she knew that God would carry her through. In this first episode, she talks about her first husband, Tony, and how she saw God's hand through a long sickness with him, and how God really just met every need that they had. Sit back, relax with your favorite cup of coffee or beverage of your choice, and let Grace's story encourage and inspire you today. Well, this morning I am joined by my friend Grace Jernigan Cadenhead, and I always like to start with how I know you, and so it was really God, the way that our paths intersected. I was hosting an event, a weekend retreat for our singles group, and I was setting up at the Webb's place in the main house, and you had just had a shower that weekend, and you were coming to get some of your things, and we stood in that foyer and talked, and I knew that I needed to have you on my podcast to share your story. So thank you so much for being willing to come and share your story today.
Well, thank you for having me, and yes, I do remember that day very well. It was Hannah Mitch's baby shower, and they had been trying to have a little one for a long time, and things, went very well, and we were all so excited. So we chose the Webb's place because it's such a beautiful facility, and that's how I met you, and I've met several others. Angie Mitchell is a good friend. I taught her daughter a couple of years, and we've stayed friends for years. So it was great meeting a new friend.
Yeah. I think the same. I always love when I have those divine encounters, and you can recognize those because you just hit it off. There's a synergy between you, and it's the Holy Spirit in both of you.
Thank you, because the Holy Spirit is a major factor in my life, and I'll share more about that as we
go
today.
Well, tell us a little bit about where your journey of faith began, and just give us a little background on Grace.
Well, my name is Grace, and that's part of the background. My biological mother's name was Grace. She was Italian. My dad met her while in the service in the Army in Trieste, Italy. And her name was Grace Voci. Voci is a made-up name. I didn't realize that until 2001. I did a search, but that brings in another aspect of this. But he married her. They dated for 4 years in Trieste, and then they moved to the States. My brother and I, of course, were with them at Fort Benning. He was stationed at Fort Benning, and we lived there. And I had just turned 4, like a month, and she was killed in May that year in a car accident. And so that changed everything in our lives. And so my dad just didn't stay in touch with her family. He felt responsible. It wasn't his fault. He was actually a drunk driver. And but he was young, and we went to live with relatives in Illinois. And then finally he remarried before he was stationed back to Illinois to be with us. He met my stepmother, and they married, and she's from Phoenix City. And so we lived in Illinois for a while. We traveled around the United States. We never went back overseas. But finally, in the 5th grade, I believe it was 1968, we settled back in Phoenix City. And so I finally have that stability of getting to go to the same school for, the rest of my high school years and so forth. So my stepmother's father was a minister. He was a Free Will Baptist minister. His name was Walter Jones, and he's priceless. All through my life, during the times that I'd see him, he was so inspirational, truly a servant. He was a man of God, I mean, no question. And so that brought the Baptist faith into our lives because, of course, my mother, Italian, she was Catholic.
Right.
And so I can remember going to Vacation Bible School, and I loved it. I mean, I just loved everything about the whole experience of going to church. That union between my stepmom and my dad brought into my life. And, of course, I'm a teacher. I'm a retired teacher now. And so I always loved school. And so I just, I loved choir. I loved training union, Sunday school, Vacation Bible School. So, and that's how, I think I was 8 years old when I was baptized. And, we had gospel singings, and all of that was new to me. So it was very, those were good memories.
Right.
So that, the Lord's just always been a part of my life since I was, even before I was 8. Just, since that time that I was exposed to it. I was 5 when they got married. So anyway, it's just... it's just a part. And, of course, I went through a couple years, like a lot of people do when I graduated, when my husband and I, my late husband, because I'm Grace Jernigan Cadenhead, my late husband's name was Tony Jernigan. We knew each other from school and from my best friend. And in school, my best friend, Kathy Jernigan, Tony was her brother.
Okay.
So I never in my wildest dreams thought that we would wind up, getting married one day. But we did. And we went through a couple years where we'd go here or there, go to Florida or sleep in. And but it didn't take long. And the Lord came back and said, you know where you need to be.
Yeah. So, He has a way of bringing us back,
Oh, yeah. He did. He brought us back. And, and we've been, tried to live in His will ever since. So, that's kind of the background.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I think it's just God works in a lot of different ways to bring good out of the bad situations. Because as a 4-year-old losing your mom, that's a traumatic experience. And then with the added of being, your dad in the military, being a single dad then, and having to rely on his family to take care of you.
Who we'd never
states away.
Yeah, we'd never met them.
Yeah.
And then losing my mother, and then also he was taken as well because, we didn't get to see him every weekend. And so, yes, I remember that, but there again, those things, they make you stronger. You look back and it just gives you a little bit more wisdom and discernment of, this really isn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
This isn't a catastrophe. This is, I'm not going to get all upset about this.
Right.
It helps you put things in the proper
perspective.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, then as you progress through life, what were some moments throughout your faith journey, just some marked moments in your faith that you can look back and say, this was a hard time, but I saw God move in that?
Well, probably the birth of my son. I mentioned I didn't give it our family, my current husband, because I did remarry. It was his niece, and they had tried for a long time to have a child. And I had a special kinship to that because of course, when you're young, you don't really think about you when you're newly married. You don't worry about, well, will I ever have a child or be able to conceive and that sort of thing. But I did have some issues that were going on, and I've been told at a very young age that, you may not ever be able to have a child, or it will probably be difficult if you do. And when you're 13, 14 years old, you're like, I'm not worried about that, And then, that's the Lord's will too. I had no problem, when I did conceive. It wasn't on purpose, but, we found joy in that announcement. But now, getting him here was the difficulty. And that's what then I remembered, I thought back to what I'd always been told. And so it was a challenging pregnancy, but the birth was traumatic. It was very traumatic for me and for him. Actually, we almost lost both of us. I won't go into all that, but of course, here I am. I survived, and he did too. And they called him a miracle baby, and he was in high risk over at the medical center in Columbus for about 10 days. He weighed 4 pounds and 9 ounces. He would have been a 6.5, maybe 7 pound baby, they said. So he had lost weight in utero. So that gives you an idea of the critical things that were happening. But he was fine. And but was that a God moment? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And then, once we had him, and then worrying about him, and is he going to make it? Is he going to be okay because of everything that was happening? And, we tried to tell the doctors, and they wouldn't listen, and, and then it was all of a sudden an emergency. And so, yeah, you had to really trust God and rely on God. And it wasn't about us, it was about our son,
Right.
And so, again, you put things in perspective, And even that created faith, created strength that, we'll get through this. And he did. And he's done very well. Then at 3 weeks old, he still didn't weigh 5 pounds, and he was 3 weeks old. He had to have surgery. He developed what was called pyloric stenosis. And anyway, so they had to make an incision and go. It's the overgrowth of a stomach muscle that would not allow him to keep his food down. And so he was losing weight again. He was starving. And so that could have been catastrophic for him as well. So yes, we were tried again, and then we built a house, and we were so proud of it, and we worked so hard, and it was a brand new subdivision. We had neighbors that we went to school with, new young couples also, but we were the first house at the entrance, and we were burglarized. And it just so happened, they think the first time when I had Chad at home with me that day, I was sick, and so I had gone to the store for something, and so when we came back in, the front of the house looked fine, but when I got to the back of the house, I went to the bedroom for something. All of my husband's guns were laid out on the bed, and and I'm not trying to be dramatic, just to give you a sense of, I knew, okay, I'm
Something's
in danger.
Wrong here.
Yes, I could be in danger. And anyway, so of course I, took him, we left the house, and the police were called, and so we don't know if they had guns when they broke in, but we know that they had a loaded weapon when they left, because my husband kept a pistol, in our nightstand, and so they're pretty sure that I interrupted them, and they went out the back window, and so, again, that's another test of faith where you just thank God, that nothing, anyway, so, just moments like that as you're maturing and going through life's journey. But everything else, again, you put things in perspective. So I was married to my late husband, Tony, for 43 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm Grace Jernigan hyphen Cadenhead.
Yeah.
Tony and I both developed COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, let me back up a little bit to tell you about him and me. We both have a health crisis situation that we can look back on. When I turned probably 40, 41, until then I had been doing really well. You know, I'd been to Weight Watchers, I'd lost weight, I was, feeling really good. I've always been a hard worker. He was too. And, but I just didn't feel right. I was tired. I don't mean tired, I mean unplugged, fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not one, I cannot sleep in the daytime, that sort of thing. And, but many days, I never missed work. I was a teacher by then. I worked at Aflac for 11 years, and then I went back to school. I don't know how we did it, but I finally was able to make that dream of teaching come true. I'd always wanted to be a teacher, and I taught early childhood. First, second, and third were my specialties. Second and third were actually my loves. But by the time I'd get home, sometimes I wouldn't be in the bed, but I'd be laying down. And he knew that was not like me. And so, make a long story short, took a long time to get a diagnosis. Things never showed up in the blood work, but finally they did. And so I won the lottery of autoimmune disease. I have a mixed connective tissue disorder, which is specific for lupus, for scleroderma, the good kind. There's a crest kind and a diffuse kind. I have the crest scleroderma, which is better. Diffuse, not so good.
My cousin had the diffuse.
Okay, so you know what that is.
Yeah.
See, most people don't know what that is, but diffuse, you have a 9-year length of life, max, usually. Crest, it causes problems, but it hardens your body from the inside out, or it can. You have a lot of stiffness, joint pain, Anyway, Sjogren, I'm dealing with that right now with my eyes a little bit, because that affects all your glandular, fluid-producing glands.
Right.
And so you have very dry eyes, very dry, and mostly at night is when you notice it. And then I don't have rheumatoid arthritis, but I don't have the rheumatoid factor. But it's just a lot of joint kind of issues and fatigue, but it affects your organs. All of these things are systemic. They affect your organs. But as my rheumatologist would tell me, you are in good shape to be in the shape you're in.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think about that. I don't dwell about that. I'm talking about it now. I really don't share that with. Most people don't even have any idea that those things exist, or medicines that I take.
Right.
I take an immune suppressant every day. And so because of that, because of the immune suppressant, my rheumatologist said, when COVID came out, you heard all those things, and he said, you don't need to get COVID. You need to do whatever you can do. Don't get it, because you won't do well. I did everything I knew to do. I swabbed my doorknobs, my light fixtures. I wore masks. I didn't go to my mom's birthday. We didn't go to Christmas dinner. We didn't go to New Year's. We didn't go to Thanksgiving. We didn't go to events. We didn't go out. We shopped online. And now we'll get into my husband. Tony was always athletic. He was in the peak of his career at Atlantic Marine Construction. He built the Columbus Museum. He was working at Fort Benning, building some things out there, had a great job. He was in good physical shape, we thought. He had an annual physical every year. And his doctor would tell him, you're boring to look at. Every year, same thing. You're just boring to look at. Perfect blood pressure, perfect cholesterol, everything. Your numbers look great. You're just boring to look at. But his company paid for this physical and required it. And then one morning about 3 o'clock, it was July 17th, 2012, he woke up pacing we thought he had a virus. No chest pain, nothing. He just was so nauseated, and I was like, well, go to the restroom, and I'll wait in there, and I'll get you a wet cloth, and we'll figure it out. And I turned on the light, and he was just pure gray. He was gray. And did I call an ambulance? No, because he said, I'm in no pain. I'm just nauseated. So I drove him to the emergency room, and anyway, he was having what they call a widowmaker. It's 100% LAD. Artery was occluded or blocked, and he had a massive heart attack, and it literally took half of his heart.
Wow.
Yeah. And so his ejection fraction, which is what they measure the ability to pump blood, was over 100, and I'll never forget, during all of that ordeal, a nurse came and said, "Are you Mr. Jernigan?" He said, "I want to shake your hand." He said, "I've never seen a person who is alive with an ejection fraction number that high." And and every time we'd go to his doctor's cardiologist, they'd say, you could have cardiac arrest at any time, So we lived with that fear that they put in a defibrillator and so forth. And I'm rushing all of this. There was a lot to it. And we had a lot of close calls. He was in and out of ICU, the hospital. But, I do want to mention one thing during that time. I had a really dear friend named Tim Cadenhead. And I knew Tim Cadenhead because Tony's sister, Kathy Jernigan, was my best friend. And so that was we lived at each other's houses growing up from 5th grade on when my dad left the military. So I'd see, of course, Tony, I would, I'm like, pick your clothes up, because her mom was sick a lot, and I'd be over there, and I'd help her with, she was like the mom of the house for a little while her mom was sick, and I'd help her. And so I guess I was in training, because I was like, pick your clothes up, put them in the basket, make your bed. Anyway, but I would see him out, he stayed outside, and this other, all the guys, there was like 13 guys that lived on that street. There were some girls too, but me and Kathy and I we were best friends. But I would see Tim ride by in this white car, or sometimes it was on a bicycle, because I was 10 when I met all of them. And so through the years, I didn't see Tim, but Tony did, because they were, such good friends. They rode together in high school. They rode to school together. They walked to school together when they were in elementary. And but again, my time was spent with Kathy, Tony's sister. And so, but I heard all these stories about the Cadenhead family. Little did I know that the Jernigans' land that they bought to build their house came from the Cadenheads' land. They owned all the land on that road. I didn't know that. And so, so one of the times that Tony was in the hospital, they finally let him go to a room out of ICU. This is in 2012. Years later, I hear a knock on the door. And I go and I open that door, and there's Tim Cadenhead. I had not seen him in probably 2 decades. He and Tony would run into each other at work. Tim was now a pastor. He was his dad was a pastor, Luke Cadenhead, and Tim was a typical preacher's son. Typical. And Tony was part of that. And so Tony might as well have been preacher's son. But they were into mischief together a lot. And so, anyway, they were just great friends, and he'd always tell me, I ran into Tim today, or we'd see Tim's sister, or the Cadenhead family, they would come down and play cards with the Jernigans, with Tony's parents, and I'd be over there spending the night with Kathy. Tony would be out probably getting into mischief with Tim. So I knew them. I knew the family, but I remember that day, Tony was so weak, and he had been put in a room out of ICU, but he was not doing well. He was still really weak, and there was a knock on the door, and Tim had become a pastor. Now, he still worked in Auburn in a construction company that he helped create, but he also actually, he just retired from 25 years of pastoring a church in Richland, Georgia. But you'll always be a minister, but he's not. He just retired after that 25 years. But I opened the door, and there stood Tim. And I said, he is going to be so glad to see you. I knew that when he laid eyes on Tim, that was going to lift his spirits. You know, that was going to do something that none of us could do. Yeah. And we knew his hope. We knew he was so weak he could barely even walk 2 steps. Truly, 2 steps. And they came in and they visited, and I just got out of the way and let them have their time, you know. And I remember that day so vividly. That was in 2012. And sure enough, you know, Tony lived 8.5 more years with that heart attack. And, of course, all he could ask was, when am I going to go back to work? When can I go back to work? And the doctors they finally broke it to him. They said, Tony, you know, you'll never be able to go back to work. Yeah. And, I mean, it's just, and they told me, you know, watch and be careful. He's going to get depressed, you know, because you know, we looked at some stem cell. He was a candidate for that, trying to inject stem cells to regrow the heart muscle. And once heart muscle's gone, you don't regenerate it.
Right.
And we'd go to Atlanta. So they finally, you know, told us, they said, he's not going to be strong enough to withstand the injections that it would take. And that was experimental anyway. Yeah. And so, so he was amazing. He was like, he understood it. He accepted. Of course, I was teaching. I was still working, and I was like, you don't worry about it. You know, you're going to retire. I'm going to keep working. I have a job I love, and I don't mind. You know, actually, the next year I was going to retire because I was dealing with the autoimmune stuff. But I told him, I have a job where I get to work 9 months a year. If I need to, I'll take off. Well, you know, you asked me about those moments where God was in my journey. Well, let me tell you another time he was in it. So he brought us through that. But, you know, when you have lupus and any kind of autoimmune like that, you know, it's not cancer by any means, but you do take, like I took methotrexate. It's a chemotherapy, but I didn't take it the way a cancer patient would take it. You know, the dosage is a little different, but it's still going to affect your liver enzymes and other things. And I've had some difficulty. I can't take it anymore. And but so I'd been through that, and of course steroids, you know, and of course that, you know, I've been to Weight Watchers. Well, that makes you gain, you know. Yeah. There's a whole nother side to all that. Well, actually, I started feeling better. So let me back up a little bit, because remember I said July 17th is when you had the heart attack. Well, in June of that year, I went to my rheumatologist, and he said, he did his usual blood work, and I've been feeling better, and he said, Grace, you know, he said, I think you're going into a remission. He said, because your numbers, they just look so good, and I think we're over medicating you. He said, I'm used to giving patients medicine, but we're gonna try easing you off. And I actually came off of medication. Wow. He said, but he told me, and I was like, you know, like, am I healed? And he was like, no. He said, you're not healed. He said, it's probably going to come back. He said, but who knows for how long? You know? Well, do you know, it lasted about a year and a half. And during that year and a half that I went into remission, it's almost like it was taken off me. You know, I can't say the Lord's hand was taken off me. He helped me because Tony was going to be stricken. And it allowed me to have the strength to help him. Does
Right.
that sound crazy? But
No, it
that
sounds
is-
just like something God would do because you needed full strength.
I did.
And so he allowed you to be 100%
Well-
so that you could care for him.
And so my thoughts were, because you have to understand financially, he was at the peak of his career. We'd built another house. And he had, at Fort Benning, these men, their status symbol is their truck. And so they all had these trucks, men. And so they drive, they have to have, this is when the really big trucks started coming out. And no, he had to have extra chrome on it and all this stuff. And the sideboard runner and, all that. So, and what they would do is you pick out the kind of truck you want and we'll pay you a stipend, a work truck allowance. And so, sounds great. Well, whenever he had the heart attack, so not only did we lose his salary, guess who got to pay for the rest of his truck? Me. And I thought, Lordy mercy, Lord, how am I going to do this? How am I going to finish paying for the house? Because the house wasn't completely paid off. My car, I had a pretty, we didn't have the money to pay cash for a car, and so we were still paying. It's almost paid off. And so I'm like, Lord, whatever. You guide me through this. Let me. And he did. He helped me. I figured out a way to do some things. But, and I went into, I'd been in administration at Aflac. I was a manager there for the 11 years that I worked there. The last 6, I was in management there. And so I had done administration. And I loved administration. I felt like I was decent at it, but my heart was with the kids. That was my true.
Yeah.
If you ask me what I did, I was an assistant principal. I was never a principal, but I was an assistant principal at Lakewood Elementary and Lakewood Primary at the same time. So it was, and every weekend, just about every holiday, because there was never time to do my job. But I didn't mind it because the Lord brought that about. He gave me the strength to do what I needed to do to help increase my income a little bit. And then a good friend of mine gave me an opportunity to do some government contracting in Washington, D.C. And I really was like, I can't do that. I don't know if you've ever heard of the imposter syndrome. Well, I felt like I had the imposter syndrome because I was like, you must be kidding. They wanted me to go and work on cybersecurity curriculum, and I would be working part of the time at the Pentagon and most of the time at Fort McNair in D.C. And I'd be living there on my own. Tony would come and visit me, but I was like, I can't do this, and I can't do this. And then this voice was like, why can't you? Why can't you? And it's like I could hear it. I literally, in my head, why can't you? And that was the same thing that happened to me at Aflac when I was like sitting in Sunday school and I want to teach. I so want to teach. I don't want to work in the business. I want to, why can't you? Why can't you? So anyway, the Holy Spirit, my sheep know my voice.
That's right.
And all I can tell you is I've heard that voice, and we'll talk about that again. But I knew that voice. And even Tony, he was like, don't you know that? And I'm like, my friend, he lived across the street from my grandfather that was a pastor. And he great career in government contracting. And he worked for the government for a while, and now he's into contracting. But it was just a wonderful financial opportunity, benefits, the whole bit. And so I took a step of faith, and I retired. It was 2016 by then. But, I decided, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I did. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful opportunity. It was scary at times. There were times when I thought, I don't know if this is right. And my friend would tell me, there is nothing to compare it to.
Right.
because this is brand new.
Yeah.
You know, you look at where we are today, we're so much further, but this is back in the beginning when, you know, right now we have all these people, we're bringing them in from all over the country, from all branches of the military, because these guys are just doing this cyber stuff on their own, trial and error, and yet you've got hackers over in Romania, you know, that are hacking our personnel management for the military. You know, they're just doing it on their own. They're figuring it out. And so we're going to we're going to bring all these people in, key people, and we just want you to listen. We want you to listen. We want you to watch. We want you to ask questions and write it all down. And so that's what I did. And I said, okay, I'll make a glossary, because I kept hearing all these words that I'm like, what in the world is that? You know, and I'd Google it, and I was like, okay, like, what is a back door? And, you know, that kind of thing. And cyber people would think she didn't even know what a back door was, but I didn't. Anyway, that glossary was 200 pages front and back by the time it was over. And that was only about a little over 10 months that I was there. But it worked out great. And so then I went to Huntsville to work for the actual company at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And that was easier because Tony was able to come and visit me more often. My son's apartment had flooded. And so I asked him, I said, hey, don't move into another apartment. If you would, move back home while I'm not there. Because there were times when Tony would, if he took a shower and the water was too hot, it could make his blood pressure drop and he could pass out and that sort of thing. And so it made me feel better just knowing that at least he was there in the evenings and nights. So that worked out great. And so so that's another time where I know God, you know, and this is just the background, but the footprints prayer. You know, there was only one set of prints because he was carrying me. You know, and two, he was also speaking to Tony, because during that 8.5 years that Tony survived, it would just be arbitrary. He would be, this is because of the passing out. I worked 3 more years in Huntsville, but I came home because Tony came to see me, and he was going to the store. He was just going to drive my car around to the Publix and pick up something for us that we needed for dinner. And he was, maybe he'd been gone 5 minutes, and he came back in, head bleeding, and I was like, what in the world? And he was like, bewildered. He was like, I ran into a light pole. It was the concrete base. It was nighttime. It was in an empty Cabela's parking lot. But he passed out. That's what that's totaled my car. And he just blacked out. And so I knew, okay, I've got to go home. You know, I can't, he cannot travel. You know, we can't risk this. And so I thought, Lord, you know, either we're just going to live off of his retirement and whatever I get from my retirement, his Social Security, and whatever we get from my retirement, it's fine. We'll be fine. But the Lord said, no, we're not done. He said, apply at Fort Benning, because, you know, you double dip because you're Alabama, Georgia, and I thought, and they make pretty good money at Fort Benning. They make, anyway, so I thought, well, okay, I'll apply, and if I get it, that's the Lord's will. If not, 2 days. 2 days, once I submitted everything, I got the call, because you're hired out of Virginia, Arlington, Virginia. It's not local. And 2 days, and I was like, well, I'm still in Huntsville. I'm not even home yet. So anyway, but that's God. That's a God thing. And so he took care of us financially by giving me opportunity and restoring my health to the point that I was able to keep doing what I was doing. And then don't forget that I mentioned Tim whenever Tony was in the hospital in 2012, because it did. He had 8.5 years. He got better. But what I'm so thankful for is that the Lord spared him. They really, they didn't think he was going to survive that in 2012, and they kept trying to prepare me. And during the time that I was working out of town, the visit that I told you about with Tim, I think that strengthened him. During the time that I was working out of town, he learned to cook. Here's the man who, I can't even boil water. I can scramble in it. Oh my goodness, he could cook better than I'm a decent cook, but he was a good cook. Because he put himself into it. He poured himself into it. Took golf away from him, but he learned to cook. He made the best of it. He had the best attitude about it. But there were arbitrary times that he would tell me during that 8.5 years, God is teaching you how to live without me. He taught you in Washington, D.C. how to sleep without me, how to be alone, totally alone if you have to be. And there were times when I felt totally alone. And in Huntsville, same thing, D.C. and Huntsville, he's teaching you how to eat by yourself, and even the year after Tony died, I thought, I ate most meals alone, other than when I had great friends, don't get me wrong, and I could get together with them and we would go out. But most of the time, you eat alone, you sleep alone, you do things around the house, and so you find things that will occupy you, and it's the same thing. See, he taught me that. Don't sit down and feel sorry for yourself. For 8.5 years, he showed me, okay, this is devastating.
Right.
My whole life is just, in his world, probably he felt like ended because he was so active. And, this man played golf like nobody's business. And I would call them his boys' club. He'd go have breakfast with them, But there were arbitrary times that he would say, you're learning all these things. You're learning how to live without me. And then he would say, I want you to marry again. I want you to get married again. I don't want you. And I would get so upset because I would think, you're giving up. That's not going to happen. I'm not looking for that to happen. And we're going to make you the best that you can be. That's not going to happen. I would get a little angry. Like, stop it. Just stop it. And, but, these weren't like 3 times right in a row. I'm talking about through the years. And so I assured him that was nowhere in my future and absolutely would not happen and so forth. And so then, again, where's God in all things? So God was there with us.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Hope, Health, and Healing. I know that Grace has given you lots of words of wisdom and just how her story will have an impact on you no matter what stage of life you find yourself in or even what storms you might be facing right now. If you have not shared our podcast, please share our podcast with your friends and family. Be sure to like and comment on this episode, and then follow our show so that you're notified anytime we release a new episode. Join us next week as Grace continues her story of faith in part 2 of Hope, Health, and Healing. Thanks and have a great day.